different formats than I used to. So I'm going to go a little quickly here because basically I've been instructed to tell you how to write a dissertation in half an hour. So let me get going.
That's all it takes.
Yeah, that's all it takes. But to tell you how to do it takes a long time because epistemic writing requires practice. What you're asked to do in the university is a very particular kind of writing. It's very different than sending an email. It requires you to create knowledge. And this is in a particular discipline using the discourse or language of the discipline, the method of the discipline, and the particular forms or genres of the discipline. So no one is born knowing how to write a math dissertation. It takes a long time to learn all that goes with leading up to being able to write it, let alone doing the writing. So it's important if you understand that this is a different kind of writing, understand that it needs to go through a process. It needs to go through years of process, but it always will be going through a process in which you are layering your knowledge. You're saying, oh, this is what I think. Oh, wait a minute, I need to understand this different idea. And the way best to get to that is to understand that you do need to practice. You need to have low stakes writing to go with the high stakes writing. So, and you need to sort of embrace writing that may not be perfect at the first start, whether that's keeping a journal of your observations at your ethnographic site, or simply writing letters to your mother. You know, this is what my project is, and these are the basic assumptions I have. And you need to give yourself permission to be that loose so you don't get writer's block. Because first thing you should do is go read some dissertations or some published articles in your field with the idea that this is a process, that this is where you're going, this is what the genres are. But you shouldn't expect your first approximation to look like my last book, right? It's not going to happen. My last book didn't look like my last book when I did the first approximation of it. You can use writing as a model. We don't really have time to talk about much of that, but I want you to think about that as you look at things that you like, people that you read over and over again. Not just read them for the content, but look at what they're doing stylistically and formally. Content and form go together. And there's a whole level at which just keeping a journal and writing daily, punching clock, just like a factory worker. If you do writing every day, your writing gets better. It's not particularly profound because it is a practice. Process. Writing always goes through a process in the academy. So if I write a really good, in fact, I have 3 things with deadlines, 2 going out to editors on May 1st. And I will send them out in some sort of array by May 1st, knowing that they will be peer reviewed and come back to me. And I will revise them. And that is probably where the most improvement in my writing and the increase in knowledge, my knowledge at least, will happen in that peer review. So if we think about writing as a process, we have pre-writing or invention, that's brainstorming, mapping, journals, observations, if you're an ethnographer, gathering data, in the lab if you're a scientist. Then there's the writing of the essay, which is where people sometimes bog down, but you just need to sort of do it. And this is the rewriting or the revision, which is the stretch. It's the important part. It's where you really change 25, 75% of what you're doing and really get the ideas. I'll talk a little bit about how to get peer-reviewed groups going. And then there is the editing. And proofreading is a kind of reading, right? It's really not writing. You go through and you're correcting your verb forms. Do not bog down on editing, because if you're going to revise what you've written, the misspelled word or the missing comma isn't going to kill you, right? So let go of that copy editing mind that slows you down, and get in touch with your writerly self as somebody who generates pages. Break any assignment into pieces with due dates. You know you have stuff due at the end of the semester right now. Sit down and figure out what the pieces are. Do I need a lit review now? Do I need a method section? I can write a method section. It's pretty easy usually for people to do. So that you have pieces of it writing and developing your writerly self as you go along. Responding to writing. Now, I don't have a lot of time to talk about responding to writing, but I did pass out a handout. And Murray gives us a list of questions of different stages of writing. So, as well, an author can suggest the criteria that concern them. They can't say, people walk into the Center for Excellence in Writing all the time, and they say, I need help with my grammar. and in fact, they have half a paper, they've written very common. You write to your conclusion, the last half of your paper is better than the first half of your paper because you finally know what you have to say. And people never have trouble with the idea that then you have to start with the end and reformat the whole thing all the way through. And so it's not ever time to talk about grammar in that format. It's time to talk about structure, evidence. So, knowing this, it makes some sense to think about the stages of your draft and what you can ask of your own draft. So this handout, I call it Murray's handout. Murray was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who became a faculty member at University of New Hampshire, and did a lot of really accessible work on how to write. So, the first thing you might ask of a paper, either a colleague's paper or your own paper, is, what is my main point? Or do I have more than one? And sometimes you find your main point is on page 3, which isn't necessarily evil in English, but it would be very evil in a science. Right? So you need to sort of figure out, where is your main point? Is it significant? We tend not to have problems so much with significance in graduate student work, but from undergraduate work that you've written papers that were sort of obvious, sort of filling out the form. But is it significant? Why is it significant? And everything in the draft tied to that main point. And one of the things I'll do with either mid-level, or an earlier or mid-level draft, is if I have a good sense of what I'm really saying that's exciting here. And sometimes I write 3 drafts, but I have something now I'm really, really excited about. It's not going to turn up in the article, it's going to turn up in the book I'm working on. But it's like, oh, this is so good. When I have something like that, and I know what my main idea is, I will go through and I will give paragraphs titles, right? So it's okay to have in a long written thing several paragraphs that fill out or look tangential, because you need that information to tie back in. But you need to understand sort of where that related tangent starts and where it ends, and to make sure you've tied it in perfectly. So if you go through and give things title, it's like early history, effects of the early history, consequences of later developments, then you sort of know how the argument's formulating in a way you might not understand in a 20-page paper. It gets long, you lose track of what you're doing. You can use subtitles for that and get it off topic. But what you need to do then is refer to your earliest drafts globally. And in your mid-level drafts, start really looking for structure. And Murray's questions will help you. Fast turnaround counts. If you're going to share your writing, and writing is dialogic, then it makes sense that whoever you give it to read gets back to you, not so much with thoroughness, but with throughness, so that you can move on intellectually from feedback. Positive helps. If you're responding to your own papers and or someone else's paper, it's really important to be positive for a number of reasons. Identifying what works, which you want to keep no matter what, increases your motivation to keep going, and it reduces the sort of sense of writer's block. Why am I doing this? I'm no good at this, that voice in your head. When in fact, what you're working on is doing good things, and it's really important to identify them and be excited about what you're doing. So I've handed out that handout so you have it for future reference in sharing writing, and to get sort of the ideas in your head of what you should be asking your paper. The late level questions, are things like, are the verbs active and the nouns concrete? Are the words choices precise and specific and spelled correctly? That is the very last thing you need to deal with, and you do that with a different kind of reading and a different kind of involvement. So that is So if you write a dissertation, you don't write it perfectly in the first draft, obviously. Now, writing in the discipline. And the first thing my colleague did here was ask, where are you, to find out what your discipline is. Because it's very, very different. And there is always sort of a clash of pedagogies. The pedagogies of general writing, like be specific and have a thesis in the first paragraph, and what in fact is the situated nature of writing and writing in the disciplines. In your discipline you will have, and I've said these words before, but they're really important to understand what your job, what your acquisition job is here as a writer. So you need to figure out different genres. That's reports, proposals, dissertations, what does an ethnography look like? We had a big fight in my department once. We were going to hire an ethnographer, but people couldn't understand why he wasn't positioning himself rigidly, and I kept saying, well, as an ethnographer, you're not supposed to over-interpret and put your meaning on other people's. No, but there's no position here, he needs a point of view. Right? But there are these genres that make no sense to you if it's not your discipline. But you need to make sense of what are the disciplinary assumptions inherent in the genre. You need to go read some dissertations before you write one. This is something that, it's a once in a lifetime genre. You'll never write another dissertation. People sit down, I run dissertation retreats, week-long dissertation retreats that make people sit and write for 4 hours a day. That's a habit they need to develop. People have trouble with it. And most of the people, the vast majority, are writing dissertations, but they've never read a dissertation. So you need to understand what you're writing is a genre and what are the conventions of the genre. There aren't a lot of books that teach you how to write as a biologist, so you have to become the kind of reader that sees what other people are doing and say, oh, I can copy that. So there are methodological strategies that you're going to learn. Some of them are more writerly than others. But all of them depend on a very high level of literacy that you're committed to acquiring at this point in time. And then there's the discourse or jargon that you're going to learn. So in some fields, long sentences are great. In some fields, passive voices are awful. In English, we write things like Shakespeare says. And in history, they would say Shakespeare said. You know, but these moves are important to understand. So it's not just show talk. Sometimes people think it's just showing off. But it's shop talk, it's shorthand for people in your discipline to understand what you're doing. But probably as you started out, it'll be show talk. You'll be just sort of trying it on, like learning a new language. Hello, my name is, kind of response.